Hi there, and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I almost said welcome to Drea Renee Knits. Welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is where I answer questions. I try to answer questions mostly about knitting, but sometimes we chat a little bit about spinning, a little about sewing, a little about health things. And I'm just lotioning up my hands. I swear it's like I have like that a Pavlovian response now to when I sit down here. I need to lotion my hands. I am wearing my Attune shawl today. This is knit up in all my hand spun, so it's extra special to me. I used for the pinks you see in there, that is Hedgehog Fibers Fiber Club that I had joined, excuse me, a couple years ago and didn't really have a chance to spin it. I know any of you out there who ever join a club, like a fiber club or a yarn club, it can be all too easy to put that stuff up on a shelf and not get to it because you have your other projects going. So I had that 3-month subscription and I was like, I gotta use this. So I divided it into cools and warms, like cool colors and warm colors. And so basically I had a very blue dominant and a very pink dominant. And the pink dominant skein is what I used for this shawl, along with just some undyed Cormo that I got at Rhinebeck years ago. So it was really fun to dig into my hand spun stash, and I love it. I love how it turned out. And I forgot what I was gonna say. Anyways, we're actually gonna talk about the shawl a little later because I have a question on it. So perfect timing that your questions matched my outfit. So let's start answering some questions. I'm also, by the way, wearing my penny pullover. So this is a hand sewn. Oh, I'm all me made today. This is my penny pullover, which is my favorite sweatshirt. I would love to sew a bunch more because I love how it fits. It was actually quite easy to make, I thought, for my first time sewing with knits. I also made my husband a matching one. He also has one in navy. And then I also am wearing some berry pants, which really don't match my shawl, but I don't care. They kind of actually in the video, I feel like they kind of do. But I love them. If you have been following my sewing journey at all, I've sewn a lot of these pants. They're just so comfortable. And once you do the pattern once, I feel like it's easy to do. It is one of those ones that's a little sparse on directions, but once you do it, then you're like, okay, I got this. And I had a lot of people asking, did you get a new camera? I did not. This is still my phone. This is very low tech podcast over here. And I don't know if it was just an update or what, but there's now the cinematic video on an iPhone. And so that's all this is. So it just does that kind of like nice bokeh effect. So I'm just using a different setting on my phone. No new camera over here because seems hard. Anyways. Let's get to some knitting questions. I know more about that than podcasting things. Okay, so after knitting loads of baby and child sweaters where the stakes are very low, I'm finally attempting sweaters for myself and I'm probably a little too anxious about the fit. The row gauge of my blocked swatch is off by 1 stitch, and by that I think they mean 1 row, from the pattern designer's gauge. Should I be concerned that my yoke will be too short, or can I count on everything working out because the sweater will hang on my body and stretch the rows to some degree? If I do need to make adjustments to lengthen the yoke, how can I do that on a bottom-up cardigan? So I actually had 2 questions this week on row gauge. So I'm going to answer this one and then I'm going to read the next one to kind of fill out this little conversation. So it depends is the answer. Yes, gravity will help pull down on that sweater over time. And just in general, our swatch can be a little off on row gauge compared to the finished item because the finished item is so much bigger and gravity does affect that, especially when we are wearing it on our bodies. A larger swatch is going to give you a little bit more information. So if you only did a little tiny swatch, I would recommend maybe doing a bigger one. And what I would do is I would measure it before and after blocking so you can see how much does it grow, especially because it really depends on what yarn you're using as well. The fiber content, if it's superwash or non-superwash, that will also affect how much it grows. Certain fibers or materials grow a lot more, like cotton and bamboo, especially bamboo, can grow quite a bit after blocking, whereas like a non-superwash wool is going to have a little bit more bounce back in memory and kind of bounce back up to where you originally had it. A superwashed wool though can grow quite significantly, a lot more than typically a non-superwashed wool. So that's why the answer is it depends, but kind of doing a bigger swatch is going to give you some information. And again, measuring pre-blocking and post-blocking is always a good idea, because then you can kind of gauge, okay, this is roughly how much it's going to grow lengthwise. I was just seeing if there's anything else I want to add there. As far as adjusting a bottom up cardigan, it depends on, I don't think you told me what kind of cardigan it was in terms of round yoke, raglan, drop shoulder, etc. So basically, once you divide for the sleeves, you might also want to add a little length to the body. That's up to you if you're worried about the body being too short, but you seemed more concerned about the yoke fit. So in that area, you might want to consider adding a few rows before you start the shaping, whether it be raglan or round yoke. And if it's a drop shoulder, it's even kind of easier, because typically there's not a whole lot of shaping going on in the yoke because it's just a rectangle, and so you can just add a few rows to get the correct yoke depth. From top down, sometimes it can be even easier, because then you would just continue on until the yoke is the depth you like it, and you can kind of try it on as you go. So just something to think about. Maybe this pattern is one to tuck away and start with a top down yoke sweater or top down sweater of any kind, and kind of see how that turns out for you, just to boost your confidence, and then try this other pattern you have picked out. Maybe could be an option. So the other question I got that was very similar was, I'm pretty good at making a gauge swatch. I do like my sweaters to actually fit after I knit them. Good for you. And I'll even go back and try a different needle if the first swatch doesn't work out. That said, I am rarely able to meet row gauge and stitch gauge. I've been focusing on stitch gauge, generally a good idea, and then making sure rows match schematic measurements more than maybe row by row instructions in the pattern. That's fantastic. Trying to take into account how blocking may change things. Is this the way to go? Sure is. What kind of patterns would crash and burn if I were too far off on row gauge but had met stitch gauge? So basically where it becomes really tricky is if there's patterning throughout that sweater. So if you have something like, there are some amazing Fair Isle sweaters that are collar to cuff to hem color work. And if you're off on row gauge, it can be very tricky to shorten or lengthen, let's say the yoke, because you need to be at a certain point when you divide for the sleeves and continue on. So that's where it would be trickier, but that's not to say it would be impossible. I think adding length to the body and sleeves is kind of always easiest. But that's the one part that I think can be challenging. And I do also want to kind of tap everything else you said, though, is absolutely, unless it depends on the direction of the knitting. And so there are a few patterns out there for sure. I think I have a couple where I say like row gauge is important here. Make sure you get as close as you can. And that can be due to the direction something is knit, or because we know it grows a certain amount within the rows, etc. But I did also want to say, so it is kind of amazing, and I've probably said this before in here, but how much blocking can change the finished dimensions of something. So I'm just holding up a swatch here. But if when you're blocking something, if you're pulling on it widthwise, and then let's say you pin it or lay it flat to dry, you've just shortened your row gauge. If I pull on it lengthwise, and then pin it or let it dry. I've just lengthened my row gauge. And so when you have this damp woolen fabric, you can manipulate those final measurements to an extent. There are certain things that I will, even as it's drying, I kind of smush like this, and then I pat to get it within the dimensions it needs to be. And it's pretty amazing how you can kind of manipulate some things. So that is one thing to keep in your mind. If your row gauge is a little off, but your stitch gauge is on, you know, by kind of pulling in a certain direction, you can manipulate that gauge a little bit. Obviously, it's always nice if we can hit it right on, but you definitely are within the norm. Most people do find it easier to hit one or the other. They don't generally hitting both can be a little bit tricky. Sorry, I have got like some fuzzies, I think, maybe coming up my shawl. All of a sudden my nose is so itchy. So just know that it's kind of the norm to hit one or the other, just because we all manipulate our hands and needles differently, and there are so many nuances that go into the knitted fabric we create, whether it be the fiber content of our yarn, the material of our needles, or simply how we make stitches. I just got back from teaching in Black Mountain at Black Mountain Yarn Shop, and it's just amazing how even within a certain style of knitting, whether it be English or continental or others, even within that one style, I will watch people form their stitches totally differently. And we, depending on how we tension our yarn, I'm doing this because I actually don't tension my yarn if I'm knitting English style, but if I knit continental, I do need to, and I wrap it around my pinky. So we're just all different, and we're all creating unique fabric, and that's what makes knitting so beautiful and wonderful. And I think the more we practice and kind of fiddle around with things and play with blocking and play with doing our swatches, where we maybe even, you can even explore blocking there. We're like knit two of the same exact swatches, measure them pre-blocking, but manipulate them a little different when they're damp, and then measure again and see what happens. The more we play around, the more we're going to learn and be able to modify our knitting to be perfect for us as individuals. All right, there was my TED Talk on row gauge. Let's go on. All right, do you have recommendations for removing pills on your hand knits? I made your So Faded sweater, my first sweater, and I love it. Yay! And it's developed some pills over time that I'd like to remove. I've seen those small sweater combs. She just mentions all kinds of different sweater pill removers. Do you have a preferred method or tool that you like to use? I'm feeling overwhelmed with choices and don't want to ruin all my hard work. So I have pretty much always used a gleaner, and I'll link to that below. It has a handle, it has two different ends, and that's what I used forever. I recently, let me see if I can pull, nope. I don't know if I can get it out of my basket here. No, I can't. I can get the tag and the bag it originally came in, but so Coco Knits just came out with what looks like a straight edge razor, which probably sounds terrifying. I can just hear you all like, ooh. But don't worry, it's not just like a super sharp razor, but that's what it reminds me of. It looks like a razor that you would use to do like one of those close shaves. So that seems pretty great. I haven't actually had a chance to use it yet because I just haven't noticed any of my sweaters being super pilly. But I've watched videos and it looks fantastic. So that is the next one I'm going to try. I will definitely let y'all know once I've used it, but I'll link that below too, because they have a whole like sweater care kit. So you might be interested in that, but I think either of those tools are a great option. And the gleaner, I have like definitely gone to town on my sweaters. I've never had trouble with like tearing a hole or anything like that. So those would be my recommendations. I'm definitely also guilty of the just being like, oh, there's pills here, pulling them off. You do want to be careful doing that because you can end up weakening that area sitting there pulling on the pills. But okay, next question. So My question is about how you select colors for your projects. I'm knitting the Cinnabar shawl and have been really struggling with the color selection. I got some Spin Cycle Nocturne and Witching Hour, but can't find a pairing I like. I have an earth tone, moody wardrobe in general, and that Spin Cycle color fits right in. But when I pair it with gray, it's too low contrast, and white is too high contrast. I'm just nervous about trying a different color at this point since I've been dithering for months. I'm also deeply invested in this because I'm spinning for the Attune shawl as well. It's my first big spin to knit project and I want to pair my homespun with a ready to knit yarn, but how do I decide what color to go with for the bought yarn? Any color guidance you can give would be a lifesaver. So I loved this question because I actually just taught my color confidence class this weekend, and so my mind is buzzing with color. So I actually happen to have a skein of Witching Hour. So this is the color, there it is. This is the color that she's talking about. So it's very moody and earthy. There's some purples and some, I would say, toffees in here, a little bit of gray. I would say are the main colors. I'm gonna try and focus. It just doesn't want to. Well, oh, hey-oh. Anyways, so you tried gray, you tried white, one was low, one was high. The good news is with the Cinnabar shawl, so I actually went and grabbed it. Mine is high contrast. I used what is almost completely red. It's the Devilish Grin, and I paired it with a gray and white marl. And so here's the other side of it, so you can see kind of the gray dominant a little bit more. So I did go higher contrast, but I'm almost wondering if the gray also felt maybe a little too cool. Well, there is purples and grays in there, but there's also the toffee. So anyways, I pulled a beige skein. So this is undyed. This is Elsa wool, Cormo. It is delightful. And I just thought that looked so nice. So staying focused, I have to like peek around the corner. Oh, I can look through the little hole. So I just thought those looked so nice together. I feel like it warms up the Witching Hour nicely. I do think that there would be a good level of contrast. But I also, in terms of contrast, wanted to then pull out my Attune shawl. So you can see the one I'm wearing. From a distance, you don't necessarily, like, to me, the undyed yarn I used in here, which is also Cormo, that's kind of funny, just kind of melts in with the hand spun. So this is the Attune shawl. So I also knit it in commercial yarn. I know not everybody's a hand spinner. So this is a farm yarn from A Wing and a Prayer dyed with indigo, is this turquoise you can kind of see. And then the yellowy blues in here are Spin Cycle dyed in the wool. And as you see, this is low contrast color work. I'll hold up that border too, where there were some colors in that skein that actually very closely matched the indigo colored yarn I paired it with. And I think that's true for my hand spun as well. There were some paler areas that were closer to the natural colors I used. And even in this pairing here, this is definitely darker. I mean, you can definitely see contrast, but if I look at this up close, it really nicely complements some of those colors in there and doesn't feel too drastic. So all that to say, when I'm picking colors, as you're attempting to do now, so you already have one color picked out, right? And that color happens to be variegated, and that's probably, I'm guessing, going to be the same with your hand spun for your Attune shawl. Maybe you're using painted braids, painted top to do that. So once it's all spun, what I would do, like, let's say, oh, I can actually show another example here in a second. So what I do is I start by looking at that color that I've already picked, and I start looking for nuances in there that I might want to turn the volume up on, that I want to make those colors shine. So this is another skein of my hand spun, and oh, it's not, oh, there it is. So this is a combo spin I did with 3 different colorways of fiber, and then I just spun them each onto a bobbin and then plied them together. And lately I've just really been wanting to cast on a shawl, and so that's why I have this all caked up to use for a shawl. And as I was looking through my stash thinking, what do I want to use this with? I actually played with a lot of different ideas. I thought about enhancing. There's some yellow in there I thought about enhancing. There is some mint in here. Obviously you can see a little bit of purple and orange. So it's just kind of deciding where I wanted to go with it. And what I actually ended up picking is, this is Harrisville Nightshades. Don't ask me what colorway because the tag's inside. But it's their really dark one with just white little tweedy bits added. And I just loved how that was next to my handspun, because I have some dark grayish, almost black color in there that I think goes really well with that Nightshades. I see that color in there, but then I also wanted to lighten it all up. So then I also picked up, I think this is their Daylights. I think that's what this line's called. And I'm pretty sure it's Caffeine, which I may have in part picked for its name. I actually also, I have a little more of this that I want to use for a sweater. I'm going to try a stash down this year, y'all. I'm like, I just want to use what I have. I have decent amount of yarn and a decent amount of fiber, and I'm like, this deserves to see the light of day. So more on that later. But anyways, you can see a bit of, this is like me not knowing how to use cameras, but I feel like I can see both my dark color and my light color in that handspun, and then my handspun just adds that pop of interest. So basically when I'm choosing colors, I look for nuances within a skein. This is some more of my handspun. So I look for nuances, and then I see, okay, what color do I want to bring out in here? Like this would look really lovely if I matched it with some mint, like right there, or even a mustard. So that's really how I go about pairing colors for something like this. I could go on forever about this. Color wheels are helpful. They can be a really fun tool to play with, but I'm gonna leave this here because I kind of touched on, that's what I was going for. I kind of touched on what you were specifically asking about, but I think that's been a rule of thumb for me since the get-go, since I really started getting into color, was looking at the nuances in a single skein and kind of thinking, where can I go from here? How can I get from one color to another color? Tends to be a driving force for me. Or I also think it's kind of fun to break some of those rules. In general, we want high contrast and stranded color work. We want low contrast and fading. And that's why I kind of like to play in the middle there with like brioche and mosaic knitting. A lot of that you can decide. It works with low or high contrast. I even think that low contrast color work can be really fun. My tip for that would be to have a section of high contrast. That's when I feel like it's worked well for me when I've tried that, is where there's maybe an area of stronger contrast and then it kind of fades and your eyes almost have to work a little harder for a minute, and then maybe the contrast gets stronger again. So really, I just love to figure out how to get my eyes to move across a piece, kind of like a painting. So anyways, that was a long roundabout little rant on color, but I hope at some point I touched something that clicked for you. So, and honestly, walking around, like, just, wish this was easier to, there we go. Just walking around my stash, like I literally just held this up and kind of moved it around my stash, and I was like, ooh, I love these together. I would use those together. So that is also a great place to start. For instance, I may have shown these to y'all. I think I did. I ordered these little minis from Wandering Flock. These colors are like, oh my goodness, all my favorite colors together. And then the other day, when I was doing my great handspun stash organization, this is my favorite spin I've ever done. This is CVM, and I have a sweaters quantity, and I was like, wow, Wouldn't those just be beautiful together? So these are actually sitting next to each other on my little table I have right here because I'm like, maybe I'll use those together. Okay, let's move on. So I have been spinning for a year and I'm part of a fiber club. Speaking of fiber clubs, here in Victoria, Australia, where each month I receive a delicious braid of hand-dyed fiber. I am planning to knit up quite a few of your patterns with these braids. Well, thank you, including the inclination shawl. Yay! Each braid, however, is a different blend of fibers. All include an animal, mainly sheep, but some are blended with silk and cashmere, others with tencel or agave. My question is it okay to combine skeins of different fibers into one project, or will it affect the structure of the shawl? My quick and sweet answer is absolutely. And I think shawls are the perfect place to combine because we just wrap them around us. I mean, really, all a shawl needs to be is a big enough piece of fabric to wrap it around our body. You know, you can play with shape, size, everything, as long as you can wrap it. They can even be little tiny shawlettes. So 100%, I think that you can combine things. I do think it's nice to know what might happen when you do that, which is why we swatch. But I, at least, and maybe there's some like spinners out there who've been doing this. My words aren't coming easy to me today. What do I want to say? Experienced. Some more experienced spinners out there who are gasping like, don't do it. But I don't think so. I mean, that's why the dyers of this fiber do these different combinations of blending in some silk or some cashmere or agave or whatever it may be, is because it's fun to see what happens with those fibers when they're combined and the yarns that we can create from them. So I love to do combo spins. I, again, love to use different yarns within a project. Right now, I am just knitting up a little cowl and I'm holding sock yarn with some silk mohair. I think that's it. I think I'm doing 2 strands. I'm like, I know I have 3 strands, but I think it's 2 of sock and 1 of the silk mohair. And it creates such a fun and beautiful effect. So I say go for it. And if you're worried at all about like maybe one of those yarns might grow a little bit more with blocking or react in a different way, that's why you would swatch. But in a shawl, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And even in a sweater, I think that can be a really fun way to do color work. I have a sweater called Pink Velvet that I released a few years ago that uses Surrey alpaca in the color work. And I actually use yak merino singles for the body of the sweater. And it was so fun to combine all those different fibers together. So that was at least 3 different fibers, if not 4, within one sweater. And I thought it turned out beautifully. So I say go for it, and I'll be here cheering you on. All right, next question. My question is about crew neck and boat neck sweaters. I love to wear my hand knit sweaters, but sometimes it's hard to tell the back from the front. Yes, it is. One day I put on a freshly blocked new sweater and thought the neckline felt a little uncomfortable. I later discovered that I had been wearing it backwards all day. Do you do anything special on your sweaters to help you tell the back from the front? I usually look for the short rows, but I also have a boat neck sweater that doesn't have short rows. So I basically, even in this sweatshirt, because I sewed it myself, it does not have a, sorry, I'm trying to open my little drawer here. Oh, they're not in here. Well, I might have to move my little camera. So generally speaking, I, like in this sweatshirt, there is the seam of the collar because it's just a strip of fabric that you then have to join. So I look for that. I also told my husband, like, this is how you wear the sweatshirt, not backwards. Look for that little seam that goes in the back. For my weekenders boat neck, and so for what I do is that has a longer hem in the back. So I always look at the ribbing and go, okay, longer hem in the back. And in general, with a lot of like my top down, like DRK everyday sweater, I can tell where I have taken my tail to neaten up the cast on edge. And so I always look for that just little tiny nuance that, like, I'm probably the only one who can see it. But let me see, I actually have a better way to do this. I just have to see if I can get into this cupboard. All right, I'm gonna disappear here for a minute, y'all. Okay, I think it's in here. I can actually move this back now that I have my little door open. Okay, I think they're in here. So here is a shameless plug for my friend Shelly from Shelly Can, who makes all kinds of fun knitter, I want to say, well, flare. There we go. Flare. I want to say swag, stuff we all get, but that doesn't make sense. So anyways, she has tags. I thought I had some of that specific one. Okay, all of mine seem to say, this is my Rhinebeck sweater. But you can sew a little tag in. And she has some that literally say, this is the back. Which I just love, because whether it's hand sewn or hand knit, we kind of need to know which is the back. And I think many of us who knit our sweaters have worn them backwards. I know I have. So anyways, I'll throw a link to her "this is the back" tags. But I also love the Rhinebeck sweater. I knit a Rhinebeck sweater every year, so I like that tag because it just, I'm like, oh yeah, this is my Rhinebeck sweater from this year. So that is, I am often lazy. I need to actually, I have like a stack of those tags ready with my sweaters to just sew them in. I need to just do that. I need to sit down with a movie and just stitch my little heart out to get all my tags in. It also makes it feel so like finished and special. But that is what I would recommend. And I think that's it for my questions today. I always feel like there was things I wanted to share that I need to start jotting those down on my list. Oh, I do have one. I'm just going to close my cupboard door quickly. Okay, so this last week on my video, a lovely, lovely, weird little spam bot went through replying to everyone, some people twice, some people got 2 of these, saying you've won something. I'm so sorry about it. We try to catch them right away, but please just know I will never do that. I will never randomly reply to comments saying that you won something, and I certainly will never ask you for personal information like your credit card number. So if that ever happens, please know it's not me. I appreciate those who emailed to let me know that that was going on, because it was while I was traveling. So we did. I've got a list of these weird little spam bots blocked that we try, we immediately try to go report them and block them, so that none of y'all have to deal with it. So sorry about that. And yeah, thanks for people who let me know, and we tried to get all taken care of. But just know that if I'm ever doing any kind of giveaway or sale, that is not how I go about it. So to just ignore it. You can also report it, I believe. So if you feel like reporting it, go ahead. Otherwise, just ignore it and we will take care of it. And I think that's it for now. I think so. I do have, maybe I'll want to see this. So the other day I was tidying up, and this is kind of cute. It's our wedding invitation, and I handmade all these. So it's kind of cute. I'm just going to show you. This will be my show and tell today. So I bought that stamp, and I hand stamped them all, and then I hand wrote on the bottom of all of them, it's a story of love. And then I got a stamp made of my husband and I. My whole idea was that I was going to get a stamp made every year of us as we grow older, and I never did it. Because then I was like, what am I going to use these stamps for? But I will say it's a really sweet idea and a great way to support artists. I found this one on Etsy. I don't know if I still have their information, but just really neat. And then we actually made mix CDs for everybody. So we have our little, this is our playlist we played at the reception, and then I got these little CDs that looked like vinyl records. So anyways, just a cute little show and tell that I found on my desk that I was like, oh, I forgot I did all this. Like, I hand stamped each of those letters. It took a while. We had a pretty crafty wedding. Thank goodness for the people that helped, because I got a little excited about the amount of crafts that I wanted in my wedding. All right, well, I guess that's it. I hope that y'all have a lovely weekend. We had such major snow here while I was traveling. And now it started raining last night and melting it all. I'm like, what the heck? I'm gone. It snows 16 inches. I come home and it rains. But it is feeling like winter here and it's beautiful and there is still snow on the ground, and I think we're going to get some more next week. So I hope that you are enjoying whatever weather you have in your area, and I hope that it is conducive to some kind of making, whether you are knitting or spinning or weaving or sewing or baking or gardening, that you're just enjoying something that you're creating with your own two hands. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you back here next week. Just a reminder that you can subscribe if you want to know exactly when these get posted. I try to get them out pretty early on Friday mornings, but right now I'm kind of going with the flow. So they are coming out on Fridays, but sometimes the timing might change a little. So if you want to know right away, you can subscribe. And thank you, as always, for all of you who have asked such wonderful questions and given me something to chat about, because this is my favorite thing to talk about. I love it. And I guess that's it. Happy knitting. Bye.